As the Germans were marauding their way over northwest Europe at the early stages of World War II, the British Expeditionary Force had one secret ace up their sleeve. It was 812 Infantry Tank Mk II, Matilda II. We're at the Military Vehicle Technology Foundation, Portola Valley, California, and in front of Matilda. I guess we'll start off with the name. The name Matilda has absolutely nothing to do with a duck. Just get that one out of the way. It was a code name that was brought up even before the first Matilda had been built. The other thing to point out is that the color on this vehicle and a lot of other vehicles like it around the world is wrong. It is the contour camouflage scheme, which was developed for North Africa. However, what apparently happened is that in the early 60s or so, the Imperial War Museum were repainting one of their Matildas. Unfortunately, it turns out that the actual light blue is really supposed to be more of a grey, and everybody figured, well, the Imperial War Museum can't be wrong, and so other Matildas started being painted up like the Imperial War Museum, and as a result, contour is now very commonly viewed as this colour scheme. The requirements for the infantry tank A12 came out in 1937, and basically the infantry tank was supposed to be solid, tough, no faster than the infantry which it was to support. The cruiser tanks were the fast ones. As a result, Matilda had armour of up to 78mm, which is basically unheard of at the time, and even the thinnest part of Matilda was still a good 2 centimeters thick, which was thicker than any part of a cruiser tank. As a result, when the Germans were meeting up with Matildas, for example at Arras, when 7th RTR went up against Rommel 7th Panzer, the Germans found that the 37mm were not having very much success. In fact, pretty much the only way you could deal with these things was artillery, Stukas, or the 8.8 centimeter anti-aircraft gun. Aim it sideways, shoot at this thing, and it will go right through. Although it's actually a fairly small tank and pretty hard to hit. Anyway, we're going to be taking our tour around here in the usual format. We're going to start off with the exterior, suspension, go around the back, up into the turret, and then I'm going to try to get into the driver's hole, and I've honestly never done it before, so this ought to be amusing. This is not a very large tank. The overall design for the armour for Matilda, which is of course what it's most famous for, it was basically designed to wade into battle. As a result, it is armoured everywhere. The front casting, it's the thickest part of the tank of course, rolls all the way up to protect the driver. Now what it's not so immediately apparent is this is actually a V-nose. What these are here are basically, these are two external stowage boxes which are fairly well armoured, but these would lift up and forward. The hinge on this is actually frozen into place. But you could stow extra equipment in there, in addition to having the armoured angled effect on the front. You go around the side, the running gear is completely encased. In the stowage boxes, the crew would of course put whatever they wanted, preferably things that were somewhat expendable, because if a round went through the front of this, it would shoot up their personal gear. Also in the front for the driver, he's got a periscope up here and the direct vision viewport. That's pretty much it for the front, and we're going to go around and have a look at the side. Now there's about an inch of armour plate covering the entire side of the vehicle from nose to stem. The side plates have access hatches for all the maintenance for the suspension system. You take basically a 1/2 inch square head wrench, unlock it, and it drops down. You can conduct your maintenance on the bogie systems. So for those of you who are wondering what it looks like behind the panel, I have the tool. One thing you never ever see photographs of for whatever reason. So it's a quarter turn to the left, and it simply falls down. It's on a chain. Inside you can see the spring system for one of the double bogies. So there's a bogie here, there's another bogie here, the spring's in between the two. You have grease points in here for access, and a pivot point here. All these rivets and bolts are for actually mounting the bogies. And there's not much else in here, a little latch to retain it. And so now you modelers can make a maintenance diorama of Matilda if you want. The wheels are mounted in 4 wheels per bogie. The bogies are mounted 2 double bogies per side and 1 single bogie. There's also at the front here a jockey rotor. Americans would call it a track tension idler, and its function was basically to exert a force forward on the track to maintain the tension on it. To actually adjust the tension, there is a simple bolt at the front here, and you crank it forwards backwards, and you can see the threads here on the screw, which will move the idler wheel forwards and backwards. The crews were supposed to count how many threads were visible on each side and make sure that they were equal. When you come back towards the upper return, very simple, there are no return rollers. The track simply runs on a series of skids. Not very efficient, but since the tank only did about 15 miles an hour anyway, it wasn't the end of the world. So it was considered quite acceptable for the low speeds. It was simpler, easier, cheaper. And you'll see that this continues on. Even Churchill has just solid skids. So it's noisy, but it works. Interestingly, Vickers also sold a number of tanks to the Japanese, and they adopted a very similar suspension system for some of their earlier tanks as well. Not much else to see on the tracks here. The tracks are very, very simple cast shape. They're reasonably solid. The wheels have no rubber, so modelers would be very glad to hear you don't have to paint all the tire on the outside of these. Simple steel wheels on steel track with steel skid returns. This is not a quiet tank. But even if you know it's coming, what are you going to do? It's got 78 millimeters of armor. Call in the Luftwaffe. Now, the British had a numbering system for their vehicles. It's actually rather simple. If it begins with T, it's a tank. So, tank 7415. Stowage for a shovel. Twin smoke projectors. They're fired from inside the turret, and they basically lob a smoke grenade out, a little mortar, which creates a smoke shield. Moving further to the rear, big armored housings for the ventilation for the engine and transmission compartment. And that's it till you get to the back of the tank.